Imagine a weapon so strange, so ahead of its time, that even the men who built it could barely believe what they were watching. A pilotless aircraft, stuffed with 10,000 pounds of high explosives, guided from miles away by a man sitting in a control room, watching through a camera mounted in the nose. No crew, no mercy. Just a flying bomb that could theoretically flatten a city block with pinpoint precision. America called them assault drones, and by the time World War II ended, 25 of these machines existed, scattered across air bases, hangars, and remote test ranges, with no clear future and no official plan. What happened to them is a story that has never been properly told. Today, we uncover the real story of America's 25 remote-controlled flying bombs and the strange, secretive, and often shocking fate that awaited them after the guns fell silent. To understand why these machines existed at all, you have to go back to the darkest years of the war, when American military planners were staring at a problem they could not solve with conventional aircraft. Heavily fortified German submarine pens along the French Atlantic coast, reinforced concrete bunkers in Norway, and deeply buried V-weapon launch sites were absorbing thousands of tons of bombs and simply shrugging them off. Precision bombing was not precise enough. Dive bombers couldn't get close enough. Something radical was needed. The answer came from an unlikely direction. The United States Navy and Army Air Forces began, almost simultaneously, developing what they called war-weary aircraft conversions. The idea was brutally simple. Take an old B-17 Flying Fortress or a Navy PB-4Y Liberator patrol bomber that had survived its combat tours. Strip out everything that was not essential. Fill the fuselage with Torpex explosive, a compound roughly 50% more powerful than TNT by weight. Then, from a mother aircraft flying alongside, guide the drone remotely into its target using a primitive television camera system called Block. The project carried two names. The Army called their version Operation Aphrodite. The Navy called theirs Operation Anvil. Both programs were deeply classified, and both programs, before the war ended, would be linked to one of the most famous tragedies in American political history. The machines themselves were extraordinary objects. A converted B-17, stripped of its guns, its crew compartments gutted, weighed in at around 35,000 pounds before the explosive load was added. The Block television system, developed under emergency wartime contracts with RCA, transmitted a grainy black and white image back to the controller in the mother aircraft. Range was limited. Interference was constant. The system worked, when it worked at all, only in relatively clear weather and at close distances. 2 pilots were required to physically take off the drone aircraft from the runway, arm the explosive train, and then bail out before the remote controller took over. It was, by any measure, an extraordinarily dangerous arrangement. The pilots who flew those initial legs before jumping, they knew exactly what they were sitting on top of. One veteran from Fursfield Air Base in England, a B-17 pilot named James Simpson, who participated in early Aphrodite missions, reportedly described the moment of arming the explosive train as the longest 30 seconds of my life. The explosive load could detonate from a single hard vibration. The radio control system could be accidentally triggered by a stray signal. Everything about the weapon was provisional, improvised, and terrifyingly fragile. The combat record of these machines was, to put it plainly, disastrous. Between August and September 1944, the Army Air Forces flew multiple Aphrodite missions against hardened targets in France and Germany. Not one of them struck its intended target. Guidance systems failed, motors cut out. One drone crashed into the English countryside near Orford Ness, detonating and leaving a crater that reportedly stretched 40 feet across. The Navy's Operation Anvil produced the program's most devastating moment on August 12, 1944, when a PB-4Y drone loaded with 21,000 pounds of Torpex exploded prematurely over the English village of Blythburgh in Suffolk, killing both pilots aboard before they could bail out. One of those pilots was Lieutenant Joseph P. Kennedy, Jr., the older brother of the future 35th President of the United States. The explosion was so violent that ground witnesses reported seeing a column of smoke rising more than a mile into the air. The classified after-action report, declassified in 1974, concluded that the most likely cause was a faulty arming circuit in the remote triggering system manufactured by the radiation laboratory at MIT. That report had been buried for 30 years. Kennedy's death was publicly attributed simply to a training accident. The real circumstances, a secret drone program, a malfunctioning explosive arming circuit, a classified British test range, were hidden from the American public and from the Kennedy family for decades. What the official records called a training exercise was, in reality, one of the most dangerous covert weapons programs of the entire war. By the time Germany surrendered in May 1945 and Japan followed in August, the combined Aphrodite and Anvil programs had consumed enormous resources, produced catastrophic failures, and achieved almost nothing of military value. Yet the physical hardware, the surviving converted aircraft, the control systems, the spare block television units, still existed. 25 documented drone airframes remained in various states of readiness across bases in England and the continental United States. Most were B-17 conversions. Several were Navy PB-4Y variants. A small number incorporated experimental modifications to the guidance system that had never been operationally tested. With the war over, the immediate question was what to do with them. Nobody had an answer. For weeks after VJ Day, these machines simply sat on hard stands and in hangars, guarded by confused ground crews who had no orders. The decisions that followed played out against a rapidly shifting geopolitical landscape. By late 1945 and into 1946, American military planners were already beginning to look east, not toward Japan, which lay defeated, but toward the Soviet Union, which had emerged from the war in control of vast swathes of Eastern Europe and was aggressively pursuing its own advanced weapons programs. The drone aircraft, for all their wartime failures, represented something potentially valuable, a technology that, if properly developed, could deliver a massive explosive payload without risking a human crew. In December 1945, a classified meeting was held at Wright Field in Dayton, Ohio, attended by representatives of the Army Air Forces, the Navy Bureau of Aeronautics, and the newly formed Research and Development Command. The meeting produced a document, reference AAF Technical Report 5436, partially declassified in 1996, which concluded that the existing Aphrodite airframes had no further military value in their current configuration, but that the underlying technology of remote-controlled, camera-guided aircraft deserved continued funding. The 25 surviving drones, the report recommended, should be divided between 3 categories. A small number retained for further experimentation, a larger number used for target practice and live fire testing, and the remainder disposed of. What followed was a slow, bureaucratic dismemberment of the program. Through 1946 and into 1947, at least 11 of the surviving airframes were transferred to the Naval Air Missile Test Center at Point Mugu in California, where they were used as aerial targets for the Navy's newly developing surface-to-air missile programs. Their endings were deliberately spectacular. Cameras on the ground and in chase aircraft recorded their destruction as missiles streaked up to intercept them. Those films, also classified for decades, provided crucial data for what would eventually become the Nike missile program. The irony was not lost on some observers. The drones that had failed to destroy hardened bunkers were themselves destroyed by the very missile technology that their existence had helped to accelerate. At least 4 more of the airframes were transferred to Eglin Air Force Base in Florida, where the Air Force's Air Proving Ground Command used them in a series of tests exploring the effects of explosive detonation at various altitudes, essentially using the drones as flying bomb simulators that were guided to a specific point and detonated in mid-air to study blast patterns. The results fed directly into the calculations being made about the destructive radius of the atomic bomb. You might not believe this, but America's remote-controlled flying bombs from World War II contributed to the early mathematical models used to estimate atomic bomb blast effects. The connection has never been widely publicized. 3 of the surviving drones took an even stranger path. In 1947, as the Cold War hardened and American military planners began seriously contemplating the possibility of a conflict with the Soviet Union in which conventional bombers might face devastating anti-aircraft fire, a small and highly classified study group within what was about to become the United States Air Force proposed converting the remaining Aphrodite-type drones into what they called expendable nuclear delivery vehicles, essentially unmanned aircraft that could carry an atomic device into heavily defended airspace without risking a human crew. The proposal never progressed beyond the study phase. The primitive block guidance system was nowhere near accurate enough to reliably deliver a weapon to a point target at distances of more than a few miles, but the 3 airframes associated with this study were transferred to Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, home of the Atomic Energy Commission's Sandia Laboratory, where they apparently sat in storage for several years. Their ultimate fate remains partially unclear. According to documents obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests in 2001, at least 2 of these airframes were eventually scrapped on site at Kirtland sometime between 1950 and 1952. The third is simply not accounted for in the surviving records. The scrapping of the main fleet of Aphrodite and Anvil aircraft proceeded without ceremony and almost without documentation. By 1948, the majority of the 25 drones that had survived the war had been destroyed, either in test flights, as aerial targets, or simply cut apart at salvage yards on military installations. The scrap value of a single B-17, even a gutted and modified one, was meaningful, around $4,000 per aircraft at 1946 scrap metal prices, equivalent to roughly $50,000 today. The war had created an enormous surplus of aluminum and steel across the entire American military, and the government was processing hundreds of thousands of surplus aircraft simultaneously. The Aphrodite drones were barely a footnote in that vast logistical operation. There was no public announcement. No newspaper covered their disposal. The program itself remained officially classified until 1971, meaning that for more than 2 decades, the American public had no idea these weapons had ever existed, let alone what had happened to them. What survived? Remarkably little. No complete Aphrodite or Anvil drone aircraft is known to exist in any museum collection anywhere in the world. The closest physical survivors of the program are a small number of components: block television camera housings, control panel units, and sections of modified wiring harnesses, held in storage at the National Air and Space Museum's Paul E. Garber Preservation, Restoration, and Storage Facility in Suitland, Maryland. These components are not on public display. They exist in archive boxes, catalogued but essentially invisible to the general public. The Air Force Museum at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio, holds several classified photographic collections related to the Aphrodite program that were partially declassified in the 1990s, including the only known surviving footage of an Aphrodite drone in flight. That footage, about 4 minutes of grainy 16mm film, shows a B-17 drone banking over the English countryside in what appears to be the summer of 1944, its nose camera housing visible, the aircraft moving with an eerie, purposeful steadiness that looks deeply wrong for an airplane with no one at the controls. The Imperial War Museum in London holds several British documents related to the Blythburgh explosion and the Kennedy mission, including the original British Royal Observer Corps report filed the day after the accident. It describes, in the clipped bureaucratic language of 1944, a massive explosion, a column of smoke, and debris scattered over an area of roughly 1 square mile. The legacy of these 25 machines stretches further than almost anyone recognizes. The block television guidance system developed for Aphrodite and Anvil was a direct technological ancestor of the television-guided bombs that transformed aerial warfare during the Vietnam War. The concept of a remotely piloted aircraft delivering a precision strike without a crew on board, revolutionary and largely failed in 1944, became the defining weapons technology of the early 21st century. Every Predator drone that has ever fired a Hellfire missile over Afghanistan or Iraq is, in a direct technological lineage, a descendant of those gutted, explosive-packed B-17 lumbering off the runway at Fursfield Air Base in England 80 years ago. The men who built Aphrodite did not solve the problem they set out to solve. Their weapons missed their targets, killed their own people, and were quietly buried in the classified archives of a war that had no shortage of classified programs. But the idea they proved, that a machine could fly itself, guided by a camera and a human hand on a distant control, that idea survived everything. It survived the failures, the explosions, the scrapping, and the silence. It survived because it was, underneath all the improvisation and tragedy, correct. The story of America's 25 remote-controlled flying bombs is ultimately a story about the gap between vision and execution, between what technology promises and what it can actually deliver in the heat of a war. The men who flew those first drone missions, who sat on top of 10,000 pounds of explosives and then jumped into empty sky, they deserved a story that was told clearly and honestly. For 80 years, that story was hidden. Now you know it. If you found this story as extraordinary as it deserves to be, smash that like button, leave a comment telling me which part shocked you most, and subscribe so you never miss another hidden chapter of history. Next time, we're going underground, into the most secret bunker complex in Cold War America, buried so deep that even the people who worked inside it didn't know its real purpose.